In this video, we're going to look at the Module 6 SAS code. So right now on my screen, I've got SAS open, but actually the first thing that I want to do is make sure that I have all the files that I need in a location I can find them. So here in a folder on my computer, you'll notice I've got the BRFS data, the codebook, and then the Module 6 SAS code. So you want to have all three of those files in a location on your computer where you can find them. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up the SAS code. All right, so this is now open in SAS, and don't forget to always comment your code. So notice here at the top, I've got some comments. This tells me this is Module 6 code. Remember that SAS doesn't see the comments rather at all. These comments are just for you so that when you go back and you look at your script, you can remember, oh yeah, that's what these different pieces of code do. So the first thing we're going to do is import our data set. So to import the data set, we're going to use the proc import step. The out statement is going to tell it where in SAS you want to store this data set. So we're going to store it in the work library. So remember that SAS has different libraries, and that's where it's going to store this data set. And then for data file, we need to tell it where the file on the computer is located. So to do that, the easiest way is to open up that folder on your computer where the data is located. Now, one thing that I failed to mention here is this data set is a CSV, so you could double click on it and you could open it up in Excel. Now, there's two problems with that. This data set is pretty big, so if you open it up in Excel, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be really hard to navigate, so I wouldn't open it. Now, if you do open it, you'll need to close it before running this code in SAS, because if it's open in Excel, SAS won't be able to access it. All right, so now that we've got the folder on your computer where this is located, if you click up here, your computer will automatically give you the file path, so we can hit copy. And then we can come down here and you can paste that. So that's going to give it the file path, and then you just need to give it the file name. And so going back to our folder, we can see the file name is brfss_data.csv. Get names tells it that this file does have column names, and data row equals 2 lets it know, hey, on row 2 is where the data starts. So the only thing you'll need to change is this file path right here. So let's run this. Oh, and I spelled that wrong. Let's try that again. And there we go, and everything's running. So we have successfully imported our data. Notice this data set has 436,000 observations, or 436,436 observations, and 275 different variables. Now for your project, you're only going to need to work with a single state and the year from 2018. So the very first thing we're going to do is, instead of working with this big data set, we're going to subset it into the smaller data set that we actually need. So for this illustration, I'm going to look at the data from Kentucky in 2018. So we're going to use a data step here, and what the first line of code does is it tells SAS, hey, I want you to name my new data set I'm getting ready to create, and I want you to call it Kentucky_2018_BRFS. All right. The next line of code, what it does is this set function, is it says, I want you to take that old data set I just read in. That's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with the big data set. And then, since I only want data from Kentucky in 2018, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with those variables that correspond to the state and the year. So to figure out what those are, we can go to our code book. So here is our code book. If you look on page 7 of the code book, you'll notice a variable that is called iYear. And iYear takes the values 2018 and 2019. And then also, if we scroll up to page 2 and 3, you'll notice we have all the different states, and the variable is _state. And notice when _state takes the value 21, we have Kentucky data. All right, so we're starting out with the full data set. And then I'm telling SAS if _state is in E, or in other words, not equal to 21, then I want you to get rid of it. In other words, everything that's not Kentucky, I don't want it. So for your code, you won't want 21 here. You'll want the number that corresponds to your state. And then if year is not equal to 28, in other words, it's 2019, I don't want that in my data set, so then delete. So let's create this data set. All right, looking at my log, everything looks good. Notice that our new data set has 6,604 observations and 275 variables. This is much more manageable. Now you always want to do some data checks to make sure everything read in. Now again, this data set is pretty big. So you could do a proc print to look at the entire data set, but that is going to take a while to run. So I have left the code here. So if you run these pieces right here, it will actually run it and it'll print out the full data set. Again, it's going to be pretty big and it's going to take a while to run. So I'm not going to do that here in the video. What I am going to do is I'm going to run what's called a Proc Contents. And if you'll notice between these two statements, one's in all capitals, one's in lowercase, SAS doesn't care. Either one's completely fine. So let's run this. And this is going to take a little bit to run. Oh, actually, it ran very quick. Usually it'll take a little while on your computer. It might take a little while to run. So notice here are all the different variables in creation order from our data set. So we can go through here and actually check all of our variable names. We can see what's available. We can see if they're characters or numeric, and that's going to become important later on. All right, going back to our SAS code. One thing to keep in mind as you're running your SAS code, notice how there's a little star up here. Well, that means your code hasn't been saved in a while. So it's a good idea to always periodically go ahead and save your code. All right, now that we've made this nice data set that just has the Kentucky 2018 data in it, what we're going to do is actually save that data set so we have it for later use. We're going to use a proc export step. So I've got proc export. I'm telling it, hey, I want you to look at that Kentucky 2018 BRFS data set that's located in the work library we just created. And I want you to produce it to an out file. And so notice I've given it that file path we had earlier, except now, and this is important, I've changed the file name. So the new file name is Kentucky 2018 brfss.csv. Do make sure you change that, otherwise it's going to overwrite your other file. So if we can run this, always check your log, things look good. And now if we go back to that folder on our computer, notice we've got a brand new CSV with that subsetted data. So we're going to have that file for later on in future modules. All right, let's go back to SAS. What we want to focus on right now are how we can summarize different categorical variables. And the first way that we saw to summarize categorical variables was through a frequency table. So that's going to be the first thing that we build. So we need to find a categorical variable that we would like to summarize. So the one that I'm going to look at is education. So let's go to our code book and find where this variable is and how we can summarize it. So one way that we can find a variable in this big code book, if we know the variable's name but not where it is in the code book, is if you hit Control F and you type in the name of the variable, you can search the document for it. So notice here's our variable that we're going to summarize. So this is the highest grade or year of school you completed. So notice this variable takes the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 9, and blank if we have missing data. So going back to SAS, we're going to use the proc freq to build a frequency table. I'm going to tell it data equals that Kentucky 2018 BRFS data. And then the table, what this does is it's telling SAS what variable you would like to make a table of. So you don't change table. The only thing you change here is the name of the variable. So running this, notice here we've got a nice frequency table. Now, some things that I might want to change here is notice if I'm looking at this frequency table, I just have the 1 through 6 and then 9. That's not very informative, so maybe I want to change that. But before we do that, one thing that I do want to show you is this little bit of code right here. This will actually create a Word document of that frequency table that you could use in Word. So the first thing you have to do is specify a file path right here. So I'm going to use that same file path we had earlier. And then you need to give it a file name. So I'm going to call it edu frequency table, and then it's going to be what's called a .rtf file. And then these lines of code is exactly the same as what I had up there. So if you run this, always check your log. Things look good. And if we go back to that folder we were looking at earlier, notice there is a new Word document that we could click on. And here's what it looks like. So that frequency table does automatically get produced to Word so that you could use that later on. All right, going back to SAS and our SAS code. Again, always periodically save. All right, so in our frequency table, remember that education took the values 1 through 6 and 9. I would really like that to be more informative. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to use a proc format statement. So we've got proc format, and then what we're going to do is we're going to define a value, and I'm going to call it education format. And then all I'm going to do here is for each of the values that education is, I'm going to put what that value represents. So let's go back to our code book. Looking at our code book, notice that the value 1 means never attended school or only kindergarten. So I'm going to say that 1 is equal to kindergarten or less. And notice I do have the character portion in quotations. And I'm going to do this for each of those. So we're going to run the format. And what this is doing is this is just creating a new format for SAS to use when we reference this variable. And then the other thing that I've got to do is let's go back to our results section where we looked at our different variables. And we want to find our variable for education. And so notice it's right here, it's number 55. Notice that SAS is currently storing that as a number. Well, that's really a character because those numbers represent those different levels, right? And so what we want to do is actually switch this over to a character variable. If we don't do that, we're going to have problems later on with our plots and the labels. So to make that switch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I want you to make a new data set. It's actually the same name as our old data set because all we're going to do is we're going to start with our old data set, the Kentucky 2018 BRFS, and I'm going to create a new variable to tack on to the end. And I'm going to call it C_educa. In other words, it's the character version of this variable. Now, what this piece does right here is it actually changes from the numeric over to the character. So the only pieces you would need to change for a different variable would be this piece and this piece. So what you would have here is the name of the variable, and then here, followed by the dot's important, whatever that format is you created in your format step. So let's run this. And now let's look at the contents of this new data set we just created. Again, checking my log, running the contents. All right, so now if we scroll all the way to the bottom, notice we have this new variable. It's a character variable. It's that C.education. And so that's the one I'm going to work with. Oops, didn't mean to minimize that. Pull up our SAS file. So now we're going to look at that same frequency table we had before, but you're going to see that instead of those numbers, it's going to have something more informative. So again, I'm going to output this to a Word file. You'll notice the only thing I've changed is I've changed the file name to table2 because I don't want to rewrite my old file. We're going to run this. Log looks good. So if I go back over here, oh, wait, log doesn't look good. Oh, I forgot to change my file path. That's the old file path for my computer at home. So let me go in here and change that. So I need to update my file path to the one we've been using here. All right, let's try this again. Ah, okay, now it created it. And so notice here is my old frequency table where I just have the numeric labels, but notice now I've got these much more useful labels. And again, I'm going to make sure I save. In addition to the frequency table, I probably want to make some graphs. So this code right here is going to make a bar chart for us. So let's run this. All right. So notice we get a nice bar chart here of education level. So, and all of the labels are now much more meaningful than just those numbers. And again, this is because if you'll notice, what we're doing here in the code is we're calling our Kentucky data set. I've given it a title of bar chart of education level. I'm going to use the variable C underscore, so in other words, that character version that's got those words instead of the numbers. We're going to make it red. You could change that. Or you could change this color to any other color you want. The other thing is this V bar right here stands for vertical bars. You could change that to H bar to make them horizontal. The y-axis I've got labeled as count, and the x-axis is education level. So notice that makes a nice bar chart. We could also make a pie chart. So for this, we're going to use Proc chart. Let's run it and see what it looks like. All right, here's a nice looking pie chart. So let's look at what some of these different options did to create this. We start out with our data set we've been working with. We give it a title. Notice that in SAS, each of these lines are ending with a semicolon. Don't forget that. The pie right here tells it the type of chart, which is a pie chart. And then we have C education, again, that character version of the EDUCA variable. Now, everything that happens after the / are different options for the pie chart. So for starters, I said no heading. So let's delete that and see what happens if we leave it out. So notice SAS automatically puts this header of frequency and then the name of the variable. I don't think that looks very nice, so that's why I usually do the no header. So let's put that back in. Slice equals arrow. So what that means are these arrows right here are the descriptors. You could also do slice equals inside if you wanted the values inside of the slices. % equals arrow. And then value equals none. So let's instead see if we change value equal to arrow, for example, and see what would happen here. Notice if we do value equals arrow, the value that it places are the frequencies. So we've got the frequency and the relative frequency if you would like both on your pie chart. And then you can do your C fill equals red. We could also just leave that off altogether, and if we do, SAS will do default colors. You can also make a 3D pie chart. You'll notice that it looks very similar. The only difference is we're going to do pie 3D instead of just plain pie. And that will look like that. Now, one thing that you'll notice on both of these pie charts is we do not have all of the variables. The reason for this is, if we go back up to our frequency, if we look at the percentage for kindergarten or less and refuse are very close to 0, and for that reason, both of those get left off of this. So you might want to instead group those in with other, and then just note that inside of the other category you have both of those. Or make another comment that these were left off due to low percentages. All right, so this code probably won't do everything that you want it to do. It's meant to kind of be a starter set of code to help you out. If there are, particular things that you want to do, please use the discussion board or ask me, if you're having trouble with your code. The other thing I'm going to do is on Canvas, I'm going to make a folder that's just called, help with SAS, so that I'll have other tutorials, other places that you can go for help when you're creating, these different things in SAS.